when you say to someone, wouldn't it be so nice if you could have control over your digital likeness, or you could have more interoperability around your imagery online or your photos or things like that? They immediately welcome it.
Hey, it's Sam. It seems like everyone is talking about privacy right now. As someone who's been in crypto since 2013, 14, there was probably no more meaningful moment to me than when I got my first Ledger device, because it was the opportunity for me to take kind of this new formed money, this internet native currency, and feel like I actually owned it because of the hardware device that gave me permission to say when things happened to it. I also think in a world of digital identity and AI, the ability to sign your transactions that prove you are human, that you are you, that what you are putting out in the world is what you want to, is so important, and is only going to be a growing area. And so I was really excited to talk to Ariel Wengroff. Ariel is the head of communications and marketing, EVP at Ledger. We've spoken to a various number of people at Ledger before, but probably the most important hardware device, and now increasingly into software and services in the crypto space. So I thought it'd be great on the eve of the Ledger Open, where they're announcing some new things that we will talk about, for us to talk about the world of privacy, of identity, of wallets, but also Ariel beforehand was at Vice and spent a lot of time in the media world. So I really wanted to talk to her about the state of media, being the media ourselves, but from an outsider's perspective on where that industry is going, especially in a world of AI and truth. So after the break, please come back, join us with Ariel Wengroff from Ledger for a kind of wide-ranging discussion. I hope you enjoy it.
Break the cycle of exploitation, break down the barriers to truth, break into the next generation of privacy, break free. Free to scroll without being monetized, free from censorship, freedom without fear. We deserve more when it comes to privacy. Experience the next generation of blockchain that is private and inclusive by design. Break free with Midnight. Visit midnight.network/break-free. Built for speed, scale, and simplicity, Bridge helps businesses send, store, accept, and launch stablecoins instantly. Serve global customers without navigating the complexities of setting up crypto rails. It's how companies like X, Shopify, and AirTM unlock new markets, reduce FX costs, and move money at internet speed.
Looking for a faster, cheaper way to move money worldwide? Owlting, now listed on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol OWLS, is building the rails for stablecoin payments. Convert fiat to stablecoins and send money as easily as a text message. Learn more at owlting.com. Hello and welcome back. I am so excited to be chatting with Ariel Wengroff. Ariel, EVP Marketing Communications at Ledger. One of the first friends I think I met when I officially came into crypto. I think you were doing about the same, and we had a chat. I want to talk privacy. I want to talk Ledger. I want to talk media because of your previous life. But first, I just want to know, how are you? Tell us everything what's going on.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today, Sam. It's always a pleasure, and I feel like we could chat for hours. And I'm doing well. We're the night before Ledger Open, which is our big sort of version of WWDC here in Paris, which is Ledger's headquarters. And today we had our sort of day one, which was a lot of our affiliates and partners coming into town to talk to them about everything that was going to be going live. And so I feel really like buzzed and energized. And you know this, but you produce some of the biggest events, not only in the space, but just in general. There's like a before and after feeling, and I'm in the middle of the before and after.
In the middle of the before and after. That's maybe the title for this episode.
Well, that could be a good summation of the media industry. So
yeah. Oh, so true. So before we get to all things crypto, Ariel, prior to joining Ledger, you were in the media world, and I know you did a variety of things in that space. And I'm sort of just interested in hearing your take as someone who now is on the other side and both needs media, whether it's influencer, KOL, or it's mainstream, is probably spending money in that space. Like, how do you feel about the media industry these days, especially in the craziness of the last couple of years?
when I was at Vice, it was very much when people were still trying to understand digital media, and they saw it sort of more as that side project that they couldn't ignore, but they didn't know how to fit in. And by that, I mean like the CNNs and the NBCs and the ABCs of the world in the United States that really were the ones who sort of trumped linear and broadcast. And anything else that was coming up eventually aspired to be like them one day, and a version of that. So there was Vice, there was BuzzFeed, there was HuffPost, there were these different sort of digital media outlets. We were definitely seen as the folks that betted the most on global youth, and that global youth cared about different topics. And by having sort of Hunter S. Thompson style documentary, we wanted to get people feeling as close to the ground as possible for themselves. So we had really small crews. I remember meeting people who were doing crews for other productions, and they were huge, like, 6 people and 2 cameras. I was like, how could you do anything documentary with this many people in one place? And for us at the time, you didn't even have to pitch it. Brands were just trying to come and get a little chip off of our sort of logo and try to almost attain this feeling of cool, and for young people to feel like they could look at them. And when I was almost at the end of ICE, I saw from the research we were doing that young people didn't care as much about branded content and editorial content. They wanted something that could help actually lead their identity, because they had so much distrust in media and in governments. And so I kind of saw that inflection point coming, and I saw that with the duopoly of Facebook and Google, technology had more control over how people were starting to consume media than journalists telling the stories of what was happening around people. Like, we started to see that fractionalization. And so then I saw, okay, brands are actually the guides, but brands have distribution challenges. So while they're working on distribution, they're saying that they have communities, but they don't know on Instagram who, like, Beauty Lover 714 is. Ever since digital media got fractionalized by that duopoly, I think we've been in this chase of trying to figure out, what does mass mean today in media, and what's a successful media business? And the way I feel about it now is, if you look at TikTok or the other platforms that we utilize, what was Vice journalism is now citizen journalism. And there is no such thing as a fact anymore. It is, what do the people around you confirm, and what is your emotional response to that? And so I think it's really difficult to be a media company today with a capital M. Like, you should be growing your Substack or your platform, or knowing what your carve out is. Like, look at even what, CoinDesk has, right? And saying, this is the audience that I seek to serve. That audience might have a cap of 5,000, 10 million, etc. And it actually doesn't need to get bigger than that, in the same way that all of these businesses were chasing unicorn status. But what happened to a healthy $200 million business? Like, that used to be nothing to snuff at. And so I think the media entity is very fractionalized. I think it's very emotions based. And I think it's impossible to go back to a revenue structure that supports the types of valuations that media needed to fund itself, because content is so expensive, unless you're something like a Netflix that is just a platform that has so much global distribution that you can fund it, but you're funding it as an arbitrage of time spent viewing versus content that's informing. And so if that makes sense, like, it's like, what is it for, and what's seen as successful today,
I think that all makes sense. And I think there's a lot of parallels of the rise of Vice and, like, today's rise of crypto, right? That we could talk about, and probably should talk about in a second. There was an interesting study I was looking at, I think it was 2 weeks ago, like, time is blending, where I was talking about how people are now wanting to verify truth by going back to traditional media formats to make sure the thing they're reading actually happened. I was at the Times for years, New York Times. I have been at CoinDesk for 4 years. We've always been challenged, whether at the New York Times, before that when I was with a female women's publisher. We've always been challenged by someone saying, well, here's this influencer who's got 3 million people, and they're talking about this beauty product. And we're like, cool, but that beauty product might harm you. Or the company that is funding this activation that you think is really cool might actually be poisoning the environment, or whatever it may be. And so now it seems like, because people are getting more and more suspect, probably through the lens of AI as well, of the information they're seeing, there's a validity that's happening where they're saying, oh, but it's also in CoinDesk, it's also in the Times, it's also in the Wall Street Journal. So I can at least believe it and start to form my opinion. So I hear you, and I mostly agree, but I also wonder if the role of the KOL, for lack of a better term, is changing, because opinions, which used to be kind of the bread and butter of what drove CNN or the New York Times, have become a little less important, as people say, well, if everyone has an opinion, then does it bring down all? I want to focus on Vice for a second, because I do think what Vice caught on earlier than most was the idea that this young, very active, very online group of people want things differently than what was being given to them in traditional news outlets. I think that was a masterful move, which Vice had been doing for almost, I think, 2 decades that I knew of them before they became as big as they were. So I do think about it through the lens of, a lot of people look at crypto and say, here are these 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds who are actively trading. They're kind of making their own money. They're making their own decisions. They're living very high risk, high reward, but they're also like have an ideology that wants to change the world. Are there parallels you see in today's kind of crypto audience to those who, Vice was attracting when you were there 10 years ago?
I mean, you have to think about the fact that Vice created the popularity of PBR and Gavin Newsom at the same time, right? Like Vice actually created hipster gentrification and the alt-right at the same time. So it really was, to your point, that catalyst of segmentation, I think, actually, in the way people absorbed it. I think if you're thinking about the relationship of what were some of the sparks that started to happen at Vice and what are some of the sparks that we're seeing in crypto, people had a bombastic belief in what they were working on and what they were looking at. I think now when you look at content, I assume everything is false. Like I have to go somewhere else to verify it. And to your point, I want to go to something that I know has some form of a journalistic standard that I can turn to someone else and say, oh, it is true or it isn't. And I find myself doing that multiple times a day now. I think the difference about Vice and crypto is there are people who are into crypto today that would have read Motherboard every single day when it was early covering crypto, actually, and blockchain technology and privacy and all of these things. But they were sort of seen as the geeks in the corner to a certain extent. And now I think depending on who you talk to, what does crypto mean for you feels very different. Whereas if you were doing it at Vice, you were like, oh, this is technology that's going to change the world. And you saw an optimistic potential. And I think for people who are in it on a daily basis, you still feel that. But if you're reading it in different ways, you might be learning about it, not actually knowing what its true intent is. You might just be thinking about it as a way to trade and make a little bit of extra cash. So I think it really depends how you, again, like everything in media, it depends how you come into the space.
I had a conversation with one of our journalists 2 or 3 months ago where we were talking about the FTX stories that we wrote that sort of ended up bringing down FTX, along with other journalists who really went deep into it.
Yeah, you were the beginning.
We were the beginning. But something he said to me was fascinating, and I had not thought about it till he mentioned it, which he's like, every time we get a leak like that, like someone saying, hey, take a look at this balance sheet, there's something going on here, our journalists have to think about it through the lens of who is trading the other side of this coming out. So who are the people who made a lot of money because they knew that something was being leaked to us or, one of our, competitors. And whether it's about that or it's 3 Arrows or it's any of these big moments in crypto where the counter trade is very lucrative. If you happen to know, we saw this obviously happen a couple of weeks ago on sort of the Black Friday Swan event we had where Bitcoin dropped. Yeah. And what was it, $200 million someone made in minutes. And I do think there is something around, I don't think when we were writing a climate article at the Times or we were writing a Facebook article or this or that we were thinking about it through the lens of who's taking the other side of the market, whereas financialization is so much of what we do here. I almost think Vice had a little bit of that in its DNA, even though it wasn't about the financial benefit. I think there was like, we get to take the piss out of someone. If you know, you know.
100%. But that was also like really, I think, how it started. The whole point of Vice was actually saying, if you know, you know. And it was always underground stories. But this is my whole point. Like, it was never meant to be mass. I think the big thing that Vice tried to figure out was if you're bringing a camera into the room for the first time, how do you do it in a way where you try to tell enough of the story? And that's a very hard line to find. Because also you have to remember that at that time, everybody said no one will watch an 8 or 12-minute video. And so it was like, how do you find that balance there? And I wish we'd actually done more on finance. We tried to launch the Vice Guide to Money, and we tried to launch a whole financial vertical. And we did a lot with Geico, but we never quite figured it out. And I really wish we had, actually. I think like what's happening with crypto now could really use like a true Vice.
Absolutely. I think there's too many independents who think they're being it, but they're actually, to the point I was making earlier, I still have to worry every single post by any influencer KOL, how much of it is this pumping their own holdings even if they're telling you they're doing that.
Do you think that's generational? Like, do you think that people who are watching it now assumes that there's mutual gain and don't have a problem with it?
I think the difference is, and I think maybe you'll appreciate this more than some, is like if you look at the, the work of like an Edward Bernays, these like core people who developed the public relations industry, they were saying that people just want others to make decisions, and they just want to, in essence, be guided by invisible wires of the elite. They just assumed they were smarter, and therefore were going to make good decisions. And so when you saw what Lucky Strike or Ivory Soap or what US Steel was doing back in the 50s or 60s to promote the smoking industry, soap used to be a commodity until Ivory Soap came around and said, no, it's a brand. And then suddenly we all decided we needed the 99% pure soap, right? It's all about, I think that we should have been more aware of when we were being manipulated. But now to your point, is everyone just feel like they're being manipulated on all fronts in the crypto because they know someone is trying to make money off of it. I'm not sure if that's a better or worse thing.
But maybe it's more transparent in the way that people need to make money today because of how media companies work. And I listen, I really believed, part of why I got into blockchain is because I believe in the idea of like the individual going public. And I think that there should be more of a circular economy that's allowed for people who are creating value that is valuable. And fans should have a more direct participation into that. I think there's like a lot of value to it. But I think there's obviously ethical implications into all of it. I mean, to your point, if you want to like get a little philosophical, there is also the idea, right, that like, do we have free will, or is our will being so intended by those around us that we think we have free will, but we're following that? And there's like this whole question of where does being an influencer begin and end, right? I don't know. I was with people all day that make their living off of that, and there's value for explaining new things in it. So it can really go either way.
Yeah, I'm in the latter camp. I think there's very little free will.
Are you?
I am.
I think that if there's not free will, there's no personal accountability. So I have to believe in free will.
All right. We will cover that on a different show.
Yeah. Okay. You're back.
Yes. What we're really talking about here is bringing you on to talk about some blockchain stuff, and specifically around privacy and what Ledger is up to. We've spoken to Pascal. We've spoken to Ian many times. We would love to sort of talk to you really through the idea of comms and marketing, because I think crypto is at this interesting inflection point. We have this amazing use case in stablecoins that I think is really focusing on the adoption curve in a way that really nothing before it had. We have the brand of Bitcoin being, overwhelmingly the biggest brand and being utilized more and more. We have 450 million people utilizing Tether in the last year. It's not like we're not doing a lot of things right. With that said, I was talking to a friend, someone you know as well, about why people in big tech, like in Silicon Valley, are not talking about crypto more. And he said the thing that I've been hearing for 4 years since I've been at CoinDesk, which is, well, they're still pretty skeptical. They still think there's too much illicit activity. They still think there's challenge in trying to burn a system down to build it up, Because I made the case, I said, why would you not look at a Brian Armstrong or at a Palo Arduino and not put them in the same category as a Satya Nadella or as Sam Altman, right? They're all doing revolutionary technology. Maybe not exactly the same scale, but it's like, okay, so OpenAI has twice the users of Tether. That's not that big a difference, right? And so I just don't exactly understand. And I do think that there is still a lot of naivete in that world, which says, hey, marketers, you, me, us, we are still not hitting where we need to go. Yes, we got BlackRock, we got JP Morgan. Cool, we did that. But we're not getting everyday person in Iowa. We're not getting the tech VCs in Silicon Valley who say that's where I'll make my next 10 or 100x. So I guess let's start macro first before we go into what you're working on. Like, what do you think the crypto industry is still doing wrong from a communications perspective?
So much of what's happening in crypto today is actually still the same conversation that was happening 4 years ago. And I think that's a big piece of what's going wrong. Like the biggest adoption that's happening outside of Coinbase, which I really believe that they're treating themselves sort of like a meta. Like I think that they've taken the approach of like, we will be the biggest and best. And if anything else is of value, we'll just acquire it versus needing to partner with it significantly. And I think that for them, that's really smart and successful. Outside of that, I think the brands that are doing best with crypto aren't advertising crypto so heavily. If you look at Cash App, if you look at Revolut, if you look at a few of these sort of fintech platforms that are just saying, if you want another way to make money, we're going to provide it for you and put it in this one place. The big thing that they're missing, which we know, is the foundation of why Bitcoin was invented in the first place, which is sort of like ownership and having control over that actual asset. And I would say, as communicators, it's as if people went into the Bitcoin and crypto space and pretended that communications didn't exist for the last decade or two, because I really feel like they started so small and so insular. And if you talked about mass adoption, it's as if you were sort of abandoning the core ethos of why it began in the first place. And so then it became us versus them versus how do we think about expanding in a way that still maintains what the Bitcoin standard was about. And I think people who come in like us, I would put us both in the same camp, that are pushing for it. Sometimes it can almost feel like a radical rejection. And so you have to figure out the right levers to push. And then I think in addition to that, crypto's gotten so much more politicized over the last couple of years that it almost feels like you're saying something about who you are politically if you talk about it, which we know from a fundamental standpoint that it's for everyone. So I think both of those things really make it complicated for how the brand overall is seen in the space, or outside of the space, actually.
This episode is sponsored by Bridge, a Stripe company. Just as the internet made information global, stablecoins are making money global, and Bridge is the infrastructure powering that shift. Built for speed, scale, and simplicity, Bridge helps businesses send, store, accept, and launch stablecoins instantly, serve global customers without navigating the complexities of setting up crypto rails. It's how companies like X, Shopify, and AirTM unlock new markets, reduce FX costs, and move money at internet speed. Explore the future of global financial infrastructure at bridge.xyz.
Looking for a faster, cheaper way to move money worldwide? Owlting, now listed on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol OWLS, is building the rails for stablecoin payments. With OwlPay, you can seamlessly convert fiat currency to stablecoins, send money as easily as a text message, and on or off-ramp globally. Learn more about Owlting at owlting.com. Yeah, last week I interviewed Reid Hoffman. That's going to be coming out soon, or maybe it'll be out when this is out. And I asked him a similar question, which I said, the worst thing that the Democrats ever did with crypto was allow it to become so politicized on their side, which really was a response to SBF. When Elizabeth Warren comes out with an anti-crypto army messaging, it very much did the opposite of what she wanted, which was, hey, are there things we should be addressing here? Yes. But the idea that we're going to stifle off financial innovation along the way should have been a no. And it created such an opening for others to come along. I don't blame the Republican Party for embracing something that has money, innovation, well-known founders, and a lot of retail support.
Single issue voters are hard to find.
They are, and they found it.
If you can get that group, then,
Yeah, no, exactly. I think the core Bitcoin, other than making their bags larger, I think the core Bitcoin OGs and really the core crypto OGs would look and say, hey, the Trump family or JP Morgan being in may not be a great thing in the long run for us. Other than the fact that they're at least saying, let's have a conversation. Let's normalize, right?
Yes. But what's happened over the last couple of years is it said, we're not going back. And I do think that over the last 5 years, there was this question every year or two of, can we actually keep going forward that's big enough? And so therefore, are we protecting the moat or do we have space? And what has happened is we're not going back, which is why institutions have come in so heavily in the US. And so now I do think that more businesses are saying, okay, we need to actually provide some kind of payment solution for this thing that people seem to want. I think the question for communicators is, what is the brand meant to be and actually hold space for over time? Because if you look at a lot of the marketing that's used around it, so much of it is this idea of updating the system, but we're updating the system with tools that already exist. And there's a piece of it. You could look at what happened with Signal and AWS, and you could say Signal is still a fundamentally better tool and something that we radically need. And it needs to exist on top of a solution that has wide scalability. And you could say, okay, for Bitcoin adoption, you need exchanges. Or you could say, okay, is there another solution that, is scalable in a different way? So I think it's I think you had to have some of the political changes over the last couple of years in that way for this level of growth to happen.
All right. Totally agree. We've gone 22 minutes and we still haven't mentioned at all what you're working on or where you work. So I want to make sure we talk about that. Yes, you joined Ledger around the same time I joined the CoinDesk. Ledger has come a tremendous way in that time. I was a fan of Ledger way before we met. I think I got my first one in 2017 or something like that, which I still have and still works, which is wonderful. And partly because I think, I was scared enough, not that I had so much crypto, but I was scared enough to say, I don't want to lose it. And so I want to protect this as best as I can. And at the time, that was the best way to protect it. And this was like pre like MetaMask being easy to use and all of that kind of stuff, right? Since then, you've created so many different devices, so many different ways for people to engage, so many different services in addition to the hardware that you guys create. So tell me, like 2025, is Ledger a software company, a hardware company, a services company? What do you want to be when you grow up?
I mean, what's really interesting about what you're saying is so important for this year for us, because over the last few years, Ledger has been a hardware company, a software company, a developer portal, and an institutional business that's global all in one. And depending on what you know about it, you only know a slice, I think. I think it absolutely over the last decade, it's been known as the hardware company. And a misnomer for us for sure is buy a ledger, put your value on it, put it in a drawer, check it once a month, make sure you're good, sort of that utility lasting. When we grow up, and I think what we've done over the last few years is taken Ledger Live, which was created in 2018 as more of a companion app for what Bitcoin was needed at the time, and continued to add different sort of services and integrated partners to make it so that instead of buying a ledger and maybe eventually learning about Ledger Live, we want you to buy a ledger signer and use your wallet with it for every single thing you need to do without having to compromise on control, on ownership, or on privacy. And I think that that's something that's been so foundational. I mean, Pascal, who you've spoken with many times, when you talk to him, there is absolutely no way that he would ever give up on those facets. And so it's really been our goal to get to this point where people think about Ledger Wallet first and then think about the signer that's best for them or the multiple, because we know that on average, most people have more than one, right? And so they're using it for all of these different purposes that you would use for your different bank accounts on a daily basis. And we continue to see that adoption. So that's really our goal of this Ledger Open, and making sure that people know that over the next year.
I can't let you slip by constantly talking about a ledger signer without the fact that I would say this is a hardware wallet.
Let's talk
right?
about that.
Or a ledger. So yeah, so it feels like one of the things you guys are rolling out is the idea of let's change the nomenclature. So why go from wallet or hardware device to signer?
Most of the time, when people get a ledger or when people get what they call a hardware wallet in the space, they're still assuming that their value is in the device. We hear it way too often. Part of it might be the industrial design and that it looks a little bit like, a USB drive. It's iconic. It's the Jumpman of the space. We are grateful to that. It's showed up in so much digital art and it's like really meaningful for us. But we need to break that spell and that myth. And so what we've actually realized is it's not a hardware wallet, it's a secure signing device. And that's much more accurate. And you use your secure signing device with some kind of software wallet or with a wallet like Ledger Wallet, which we used to call Ledger Live. And really, it's about celebrating the heritage of what got us here as a brand. But we need to create clarity if we actually want people to have bigger adoption. And also, as we've sort of been talking about, you can use your Ledger as your login. You can use it like with your FIDO2 technology. And we know that with AI coming and all of these sort of identity verifications, proving that you are you and proving your humanity is something that will actually be harder and something you need to do on a daily basis. And so as we're doing this, why do you have to give up all of your information when you do it, when you could actually just be verifying on your ledger that you are who you say you are and only giving that website or that tool what it needs to know, right? Or what we talked about, is this content real, right? I did this happened, it was verified on my ledger at this time, and really embracing that for the next era of digital ownership.
So signer is a way of saying cryptographically, I am proving that this is me because I've put in both a hardware device and a password and click sign, right? That allows me to, I guess, to the best extent possible, say, this is Sam doing this activity. The wallet, it sounds like, is actually the pairing of that with the software system, which was Ledger Live, which we all use who have a ledger. And to your point, saying the wallet is where the assets actually reside. They just can't be moved without the signer authorizing the transaction.
Well, your assets always exist on the blockchain. And so people need to understand, especially if you're new in this space, that when you buy a ledger, your assets don't move from the blockchain to your device. The device is what helps you keep your assets actually and stay secure. And so with clear signing and with transaction check, you can securely sign. And to your point, not only verify what you're seeing on the screen, but then also in the future in use cases, actually verify this is me. This is, this is Ariel. I have a cat. I live in Paris, all of these types of things. And it's really important because people take risks every single day. And there are some risks that you actually don't need to take anymore. And we need more users to understand that.
The analogy I've been using with a lot of people is we teach our children to look both ways before they cross the street because we want to protect them. But no one is really doing that for our digital safety and our digital security. Maybe you guys are doing that more than most. But there is, the thing I hear time and time and time again from people talking in the space is the convenience trumps the security. I don't understand why we allow that to be the response, right? In the same way in New York City, I'm not going to just leave my front door open and my apartment open because I know the context of where I live. Doesn't mean everyone's bad, but there are some bad actors every once in a while. And therefore, I want to protect as much as I can. And I carry keys with me in order to get back into my house.
Listen, table stakes. But you have to remember, and Ian's the best person to speak about this, but in this sort of revolution of information, which he talks about, this version of the internet was not built for the way that we use it for our value today. And so everyone is trained to go through speed, speed, speed. And they're not trained to think about, well, what am I giving up in the process? But that has changed so much in the last year or two. I do think that the friction of codes for login and CAPTCHAs and puzzles and all of these things that somehow show it took you long enough to input something is giving people enough of a moment of saying, oh, maybe I should just take an extra step, right? And I don't think you have to compromise on convenience or on ease of use to have great security and privacy. We just needed to get to a point where we're providing it to our users.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I was away this past week and I decided I'm going to tune off from work. And so I didn't bring my work computer, etc. I then saw some tweet from someone who was like, oh, this is the last day to claim something that I was able to claim. And I go and I check in my address and it says you are approved to receive this airdrop. And then I realized my ledger was home. And so I missed out, right? Because I didn't have the hardware device on me, because in my world of saying, hey, I'm going to not, bring this thing everywhere because I don't want to get in that mode, I also cost myself the opportunity of maybe $5, $50, $5,000. We don't know until a future moment when we know the value of it. I want to ask you about the realities of being the company that you are and the idea that, in essence, you are seeing still the signer device having to be a separate thing than your phone, for example, which wouldn't be the issue if I could sign on my phone.
Sure. But I think the difference that we still are at is that your phone is not secure, right? And I didn't know this until I worked at Ledger, but your phone is not tied to a screen that is created in a way that's actually verifying and that you're seeing what you're meant to see. And so right now, security and your phone need to be separate. In every hardware revolution, there's an unbundling. We're absolutely in that phase. And the truth is, what I would say to you about that, because you're more of an OG user, is you should have a ledger that's more of like your mint ledger that you keep with you, that you travel with, that you feel comfortable about. It's not your big bag. And if something happens that you need to do, you can do it on the go. It's a very interesting thing to me. People will wear really nice jewelry and really nice watches or be sneakerhead collectors or trading cards in their pockets, and they feel more comfortable still doing that than carrying a ledger in their pocket all day, every day. And it's something that if you speak to a newer person in the space, if you speak to a college student that's getting into it, they get it. They have no problem. And also because for them, the best value system is just the best app, right? So they're not even thinking about it in the same way. It's not a problem to have multiple devices, and they actually kind of prefer it. So I think there is that piece. I'm not sure if we'll get to a point in the next, close to almost like probably 3 to 5 years where we don't have something that could be together. But right now, yeah, you need them separate.
Well, it's interesting because I was doing an event in Rio, and Rio has a reputation of being riddled with crime, which doesn't make it a terrible country. It just means you have to go eyes wide open. And I went and had a great time. But of course, I left my watches home. I left my jewelry home. I left my ledger home because I was like, if I had the ledger and something happens, then that is a vector of attack for me.
But that's a mindset,
For sure.
yeah, and 100%. We make those judgment calls all the time, right? Like today, am I going to wear my Apple Watch or am I going to wear something different? And does that mean it's going to say something about who I am that day? And I'm going to make that trade off, right? Like whatever. But that is a mindset shift. And I will say, from what we're seeing, more people are buying ledgers, more people are using Ledger Wallet, and carrying around another device is not a barrier for adoption. It's a change in perception. And we're trying to create simpler language to make that change easier for everyone so that when newbies come in, they're not even thinking about it.
I think that makes sense. I want to take the last bit of our conversation to talk about digital identity because I think it's very easy to say, hey, you have 10,000, you have 50,000, $100,000, you should protect it. I think that's a conversation that most people would get of any age. I think it's different to say your persona, your face, your words, your digital life, your digital footprints. And I want to ask you where you think we are in the on the sort of timeline of people taking that as seriously as you might your tangible financial value. I can see in a world of AI, and we see this every day with Sora and all the different tools coming out, that people's image is being stolen from them day in, day out, being utilized for anything we want it to do. And there's no way for me to, one, revoke the keys of my image or my brand's image, nor is there a way for me to say, I will allow this under these circumstances and I will sign a smart contract that allows this. So where do you think we are in the digital identity game?
I mean, I think that what we've seen with ChatGPT and Sora is radically speeding up the conversation. And the fact that Sam Altman also has World ID makes it so that we're squarely being put in the juxtaposition of what do the next 5 years look like, which I think before was like, what do the next 20 years look like? It's upsetting to me that people feel comfortable giving away their biometrics even if they think that it's blockchain based because it's centralized and there's no way to reset your biometrics. And so I think that's really at odds with the idea of what it means to actually own your digital identity. It's also, I think, heartbreaking to sort of hear that juxtaposition from you of, I understand why I need to protect my monetary value, but I don't understand why I need to protect my digital value. And we really have no control over any of that right now. But I will say, when you say to someone, wouldn't it be so nice if you could have control over your digital likeness, or you could have more interoperability around your imagery online or your photos or things like that? They immediately welcome it. And it's moving so much faster than before. If you look like 25 years ago at Minority Report, which, by the way, has the most patents that ever came out of any film, because Spielberg put futurists in a room and said, have at it. And a lot of those folks were the early people on AR and on the internet and all those things, and regret it if you watch some of those documentaries. A lot of those things have come, right? Like predictive advertising, facial recognition technology, scanning for criminology and predictive criminology. All of those things are technologies that we utilize today. So I would absolutely guess that in the next 5 years or 10 years, people will have kids that are applying to college and they'll be competing against, deep fakes and bots that also are. And it will require governments to acknowledge a need for some kind of digital identity verification solution that they will need to also adopt, that will be tied. And also for Apple, starting this year, I believe, if you're flying within the United States, your domestic passport can be verified through your Apple ID. And so we were already seeing this happen. And I had a conversation with a journalist that I think we both know recently. And I said, don't you think that your audience deserves the opportunity to at least be educated on the topic? Because they said to me, well, shouldn't I assume that Apple can do all of these things for me? And I said, yeah, you can assume that, but don't you think that it deserves a discussion? To me, what's scarier is we've entered this era where we're so used to the technology that we're utilizing on a daily basis that we forget how quickly it actually changes over. And I just think that that's a very fascinating piece for it to be in, and Ledger will absolutely be part of that future.
You said it all there, which I love. Before I let you go, what's coming? I know you have open right now, but as you look to 26, as you look to 27, what are the areas you think are going to see the biggest growth, whether it's for Ledger specifically or in crypto?
Well, for us over the next year, we're really excited about everything that we're doing with Ledger Wallet and signers. We're also introducing multi-sig, which is really important on the enterprise side because it's finally that bridge between sort of retail and institutional, where a lot of our friends who have started businesses can really turn to Ledger and have that security for leaders that they need and not get a retail product for something that is becoming on its way to potentially a multi-million-dollar business. And that's exciting. I think for us, we're very much focused on our partnership with the Spurs in San Antonio and seeing that thrive. And then really on the horizon for us long term, of course, thinking about verification and proof of view is essential. So I can't really share more than that, but we're kind of keeping our eyes on the prize there.
Ariel, thank you for spending the time with me. I really always love talking to you, seeing you. Hopefully we'll do it in person soon. Good luck with Open. When this comes out, this will have completed. So we'll read all the news that comes out of Open, I'm sure, and discuss that on our normal channels. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to your team.